We're going to talk about him with Alex Urban first of the Eat 'em Up podcast. We want to talk some Tigers with him. We talked to his buddy Jordan recently, and I like this podcast. It's a good podcast, good temperature taker of the Tigers, and the season just cracks me up with 162 games here because we're either in despair or we're in elation. There's really not a lot of in between, and for a team that's objectively playing pretty well, I still have a lot of people saying, oh, they lost to Oakland or whatever they're called now, and they did this and they did that. So we'll take Alex's temperature, but what's your favorite barbecue food, Alex?
Oh, I got to say some ribs. Some ribs. I'm a rib man. I can put down a lot of ribs. I'm not a big guy, but I can put down a lot of ribs.
A classic.
Just right. Yep. And they got to slabber them with the sauce. I do like some dry rub now and again, but yeah, I'm a rib man for sure. How about yourself?
I would say, so I'm a big wing guy. If we can put wings in the barbecue category, a good smoked wing, I'm a big wing fan in general. So I think that would probably be my food of choice in the barbecue category, or usually I go with like a pulled chicken sandwich.
Yeah, well, now you're talking my language. I wouldn't have thought chicken wing, but I do have a list on my phone of like 40 different, I usually try to order wings whenever I go somewhere new, and I rank them, and I got a list of like 40 or 45 places on my phone ranked from like 1 to 44 of my favorite wings. So you're talking my language now. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, let me go wings after ribs.
So we have Alex Urban's wing rankings. These are what, wing places in the Detroit area, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. All in the Detroit area, and then if I'm out up north or on the west side or something like that, I enter them in. But yeah, mainly on the east side of the state.
So for the East Siders, what's the number one place?
It's called Sweetwater Tavern. It's going to be known to a lot of wing lovers in the area. It's on Congress in downtown Detroit. They make them one way, no substitutions, no ordering them different ways, and they are by far, you got to go to that location. They have some express, but they're not locations, but they're not the same. Sweetwater Tavern, downtown Detroit, that is the spot, and I stand by that. And I'm a chicken wing connoisseur, as I like to say on Twitter.
So when you say they make them one way, what is that one way?
They're brined. They don't have a ton of sauce on them. They're a little bit vinegary. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a dry rub, but they're more on the drier side than the wet side. But they make them the one way that you order them. You can get a half size or a full size. Get them with some fries. Get them with I'm a blue cheese man when I get my wings. And yeah, that's like my spot. If I got a birthday or I'm taking somebody new to the city, I got to take them to Sweetwater Tavern for sure.
Okay, interesting. Okay, now I get a feel for the style of wings you like. My favorite restaurant in the entire country is a wing place. It's down in Bloomington, Indiana, because that's where I went to school, and it's called Buffalo's. So if you ever make it down there, I would suggest that. But I can feel Rex, my content producer, yelling at me for spending the first 5 minutes on wings here. So I'm going to heed his calls here and move us to Tigers. Not that we won't get back to wings by the end of the interview. We got another 20 minutes or so we're good there. But I like that you have a wing ranking. We might be able to work that in here in future appearances. But yeah, I'm curious where you stand with the Tigers. It's funny. I'm kind of a cut through the middle guy. I understand that there's ups and downs in life in general and in sports and all of that. But baseball is just so funny to me because we all know the way, if you follow baseball, you're a baseball fan, you know that there's ups and downs in the season, that no team can stay hot for the entire season. It's when you catch the different teams. Bobby Scales said that on the broadcast the other day. And it's just funny because I've been talking to people and they were so down after the Athletics series. And then I look at the overall and I'm like, well, this team still has top 5 odds to win the World Series. So I feel like they're doing something right.
Yeah. And I think with your open, you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, everybody kind of wants to do some pearl clutching when they have a little bit of a downward trend, like they got swept by the A's. But at the end of the day, what's been made about this team, good, bad, or otherwise, is the fact is they entered September as the number 1 seed in the American League. Of course they're a flawed team, and of course, they've got some warts to them, but this has been a tremendous summer of baseball to watch. I still think it's a tremendous team. There's some certain things that give me pause, but I truly think that they're going to go all the way. But in that same breath, I don't see another team in the American League that I'm, pound for pound think that is head and shoulders better than the Tigers. So I like the way that they're looking. I mean, they had the second-ranked bullpen in the entire league in the month of August. Who saw that coming? Even in a night like tonight where the pitching kind of fell apart, they scored 8 runs. And if you're going to score 8 runs, you're going to win most of the games. So it's an up-and-down season, like you said. I am very encouraged with how they've looked lately, and I think here entering the stretch run, they're going to play some really good ball. It's not always about who you play, and you brought that up just now. The New York Mets, who just kind of took it to the Tigers tonight, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago, they were completely in a nosedive. I mean, Cleveland swept them in New York. They just couldn't get it all figured out. So it's not always who you play, but when you play them. The opponents that the Tigers played when they were, lost 11 of 12 or what it was, certainly know that. But they're punching back up to their weight now. And, once you get Kerry Carpenter going a little bit, I think this team's going to be really fun to watch entering the playoffs.
I agree. And one thing that I kind of focus on, because we do know it's a season of runs, and you can makes me think of the 2012 run for the Tigers. I was at one of those World Series games, and you had a good feeling about that team all year, and they were objectively one of, if not the best team that year. But all throughout that World Series, it was like, they're not going to win this. They're not. Their bats are so cold right now. It's just not going to happen. And there is something inside me that kind of says, because Dirk said this on a broadcast somewhat recently, and Benetti made fun of him, but I do think he was talking about, I think they were talking about the Brewers and how hot they were at the time, and how, you're hot too early. There is something to that. It doesn't mean you can't be hot again, but you're probably not going to be hot from then through the playoffs. So there is kind of a limit to that. And the fact that the Tigers inversely are in a little bit of a downward, or have been in their downward swing. Hopefully they're swinging up at the right time, because although I agree with you that they probably won't have the most complete roster going into the playoffs, I do want to ask what you see as some of the roster deficiencies, but they probably won't have the best roster on paper. But I do think that they'll be one of a handful of teams that, if they get hot enough, they can make the run to the World Series, especially with the run they exhibited last year. It just has to mean they get hot at the right time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, how often have we seen world beaters in the regular season across any sport that just kind of patter out in the playoffs? I mean, I'm a big Lions guy. I know you're going to talk to Jeff later. Great dude. The Lions were the number 1 seed this year, and then they got their butts kicked at home by Washington. So it's not necessarily how you finish or how you play in the middle of the regular season. It's how you go into the playoffs and kind of the momentum that you have, as much as momentum as you can have in sports. But yeah, like you said, you just have to look back at last year in the gritty Tigers. They were the hottest team in baseball going into the playoffs, and they were one game away from going to the ALCS when people gave them less than a 1% chance to reach the playoffs in August, I think it was. So, this is a good opportunity for them to get hot in the month of August. They've got some reinforcements coming. I mean, the roster's just expanded. Justin Henry Malloy and Chase Lee were called up. I believe Sawyer Gibson Long as well. I'm waiting to hear the corresponding move. But, I mean, Henry Malloy, I know a lot of people have kind of poo-pooed him this year, but he's been tearing the cover off the ball in Toledo. I think he's got over 900 OPS on the season. So he's an interesting piece. I mean, he was on your playoff roster last year. And Chase Lee, I mean, I know he's had his ups and downs after being sent down to Toledo, but he is a guy who is throwing up zeros for the majority of the first half of the season. So, if they can really catch fire a little bit here in September, I think that they are going to be well positioned to make a run for the World Series. They do a lot of the little things well, Ryan, that I really appreciate. I mean, they are, I think the last ranked team for steals, but I think that's for a reason, because they're the first ranked team for going first to third on a single. So, outside of a couple, gaff games, like I like to say in Oakland, where it just felt like maybe they weren't as focused or they were tired playing on the West Coast, they do the fundamentals really well, and I think they're a well-coached team, a well-managed team, and if they can get hot at the right time, look out, because I don't know if there's another team in the American League that's going to beat them.
I agree, and I think you set up a couple interesting threads to go down there. One is the call-ups, because I do think their depth is a real strength, especially after the trade deadline acquisitions that we talked about right after the deadline, which I'll want to kind of get your take on and talk about more. But yeah, their playing style, I think, is very conducive to a run, because they're not dependent on, okay, we've got to hit this many home runs, we've got to have this much shutdown pitching. They put pressure on other teams. And one of the things that I like to look at even in the course of a season is the trend lines that maybe people aren't looking at with different things. And with a baseball season, one of the things that I was noticing about their schedule, especially lately, is their schedule is very favorable for a run in September, not only because of the trade deadline acquisitions, the call-ups that you talked about, the depth that we're talking about, but the fact that they have finally gotten to a point in the season where they have at least one rest day a week, which I think is going to change the pitching situation dramatically for Hinch, and they typically do better in that situation, as most teams do. Plus, they are, I think, officially done with playing, you mentioned it, you alluded to it, but playing games in another time zone. I think they're done with that for the rest of the season, if I read that correctly, obviously until the playoffs, however that comes together. But those are things that drag on teams. I tend to bring things up on this show that people don't really care for as excuses, injuries or time zone differences. But those things matter. If you were a college football fan last year and you watched that Big Ten schedule when they expanded to USC and UCLA, the against the spread, those games were chaos when teams had to travel multiple time zones. It's the same for baseball. Yes, it's a long season. Yes, there's a lot of things that play into it. But when you're out of your routine, Scooble talks a lot about his routine. When you're out of your routine and you can't get into it properly, just being a little bit off in baseball is a huge deal. So those minor things, if they think the socks that they wear make a difference, then I'm okay thinking that the time zone and the schedule breaks make a difference.
Oh yeah, I think there's so much to that. I mean, baseball players are such creatures of habit, right? So, and I always like to use the example of so many of us look at these guys like they're machines and they're professional athletes, and we don't look at them as day-to-day guys. But I try to think of myself trying to perform at my 9-to-5 job on the West Coast and starting at 10 p.m. our time. I just think I'd be off my rhythm. I'd be tired. I'd be dragging a little bit. You talk about the plane and the travel, being away from family. So all of that has something to do with how some of these guys play. And honestly, historically, the Tigers have not been a good organization playing on the West Coast. But I am very happy that that's behind them. I think you are correct. I think they're in the Eastern time zone for the rest of the stretch run here for the regular season, maybe in the Central. But I think that's, more power to them. And the days off are huge, too. I mean, let's use the example of Tommy Kahnle. This is a guy who was your setup man earlier in the season. He looked tremendous doing it, and then he kind of fell apart approaching the All-Star break and thereafter. But, Tommy Kahnle has now thrown more innings than he has in the last two seasons, and the most he has since 2019. So I think a little bit of fatigue might be going on there. A lot of these young pitchers are throwing the most innings that they've ever thrown in their career. So the more rest that they can do, the more, the longevity in terms of the starters, they have more rest, so they hopefully are able to go deeper in games, push back some of these bullpen guys a little bit. That is going to be tremendous for this team as well, because the more that they can kind of rest these arms and keep them on ice, the better. And then, that I know we're going to talk a little bit about the deadline, but Paul Sewald, we don't even know what we have in him yet. So it might be something, it might be nothing, but it's exciting to think they're going to have a fresh arm coming on here, and an arm that can really miss some bats, because that's still really what they're lacking. And the guy that was the closer for the Arizona Diamondbacks when they went on their World Series run in 2023.
That's a great point, and I want to pick up there after the break here, because I do think, I've talked about that on previous shows, I do think the pitching depth is going to really reap a lot of benefits, and I don't think people were fully aware of the amount of innings on some of these guys. So stretching them out, I think, is going to matter, and then plus the reinforcements that are coming, like you mentioned. So we'll come back with Alex Urban of the Eat 'em Up podcast, and we'll be right back. Coming back here with Alex Urban of the Eat 'em Up podcast. Great conversation with him so far. Alex, I thought you brought up a great point before the break about the kind of prolonging some of these arms, because one of the things that I was talking about as Canely and others were scuffling a little bit, and as we knew we were going to have to get some reinforcements in the break and before the trade deadline, Canely and Holton are two that come to mind. There's probably more. That Flaherty actually is another one, even though he's a starter. There's a lot of mileage on these guys, and again, another thing that maybe people wouldn't necessarily pay attention to or have as much empathy for. But it's hard to find a reliever that has more wear and tear and stress on him than Holton over the last 3 seasons or so. He's been an opener. He's done some long relief. He's done a lot of, he basically always came in a pressure situation. And I think that's added up a little bit, but it's been nice to see some of these new guys that have been able to stretch the people out a little bit. Obviously, Finnegan has been great, and that's been a nice addition to the back end of the bullpen, but being able to throw some of these other arms in there, and I was big on Chase Lee earlier in the season. I think he'll be a welcome addition. I'm curious to see who else they're going to factor in, but moving Melton to kind of the long relief, adding some of those guys like Montero, who has flashed. He's been up and down, but he's flashed. Finnegan has looked superb since they acquired him. I think you were right to bring up Seawald. I think they could potentially get something out of him. We've got Alex Lang in the mix. Now we talked about him during your last appearance. There could even be Alex Cobb in the mix on the starter side. You don't know where he's going to factor in. So I do like the depth. I think they really, even though we weren't sure at the trade deadline how these pieces were going to fit, they at least elongated the amount of time between usage for basically every pitcher that they needed to.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be really fascinating throughout the month of September is seeing the mixing and matching. And I think it's going to be a little bit of an understated tryout session for the bullpen in the playoffs. Like, they're going to have some guys like Chase Lee that have just come back up after being in the minors for a while. You're probably going to see Alex Lang again, like you mentioned. We talked about Seawald. Troy Melton has looked very good in his, albeit very short stint in the bullpen. And then if you can get guys like, Brant Herter, right, or Holton, who you mentioned, who's been truly their best reliever over the last 2 seasons, maybe not this season, but the last 2, you could make an argument he's been an MVP for the Tigers. You get some of those guys right, and then you stack them up with Finnegan in the back of the bullpen, Vest, most certainly, and some of those other guys that you mentioned. You're going from what a lot of people deem as the weakness of this team, which I frankly have to agree in some facets, to somewhat of a strength. But I do think Chris Fetter, Juan Nueves, and Robin Lund are 3 of the best pitching coaches in all of Major League Baseball. I mean, just you brought up Rafael Montero. I think that's a great example. He was statistically one of the worst pitchers in the entire major leagues over the past 2 or 3 seasons. And while he hasn't been lights out since he's been here, he's certainly been serviceable. And he's a guy that can miss bats. And I know that they've tinkered a little bit with his grip and where his fingers are placed in the ball. But I think down the stretch here, they're going to try some guys in a few different spots. I mean, every game matters. Obviously, they're going for that number 1 seed. But, I think it's fair to say they've probably got the division locked up. So there's not as much pressure for them to perform on a night-in, night-out basis in terms of making the playoffs or not. So that gives them a little bit of flexibility to try different things, maybe subtly, to see how different guys perform. You look at Drew Summers today, who was in a big spot. They let him go against Francisco Lindor and Juan Soto in the game. It didn't work out, but to me, that just showed they're trying to get everything they can out of some of these guys, see how they perform in high-leverage situations, and let the chips fall as they may. And, a lot of us are probably going to disagree with these choices down the stretch, but I do think there's probably a bigger plan going on in the background to see what they have.
That's a great point, because I think, AJ Hinch, we know, and all the pitching folks that you mentioned, Hinch is always playing not even chess. He's playing 3D chess, not checkers. And I do think he is looking ahead. And this is a big difference that we probably should highlight, because we did cross that time frame that you mentioned, that they had a 0.2% chance to make the playoffs, and then they made that great run. And it was very exciting, and it was a lot of fun. But it was kind of the inverse of what we're talking about this year. It was the idea that they started that run so early that they were bound to probably run out of gas. They had so many high pressure games. They had to expend so much energy. At some point, we were going to be seeing too many guys, too many relievers, too many times. And that kind of did come back to bite them. Now they're in the reverse situation. Yes, they're fighting for that number 1 seed. They're fighting for the bye, but they're in a position where they're pretty confident they're going to factor in to the high end of the playoffs at the moment, the way they're playing and the way the schedule looks. So between all of that, they now can do some future planning. They can get that pitching room lined up the way that they want. They can find out who fits in what situations, like you said, with trying Summers. They're clearly trying him. Yes, it didn't pay off today, but like you said, I like that they're trying him. I agree with you. And that's one thing that always occurs to me, especially with baseball. It's such a big difference looking at the box score and seeing what actually happens in the game, because Montero is the guy that makes me think of this, because watching him, some of his games haven't been so good, but man, I've liked the movement and I've liked what he's been since he's been there. And like you said, these are just a few adjustments coming in the door. So maybe he's ready to do some things in the playoffs. He does have playoff experience, but I like that they're able to align people properly, find out where they fit. And I don't know that there's a team in the league that benefits from 2 additional roster spots more than the Tigers as well, since they use their pieces so well as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that can't be overstated at all. You know, AJ Hinch is the best in the league at mixing and matching his roster. I think, you know, you look at a player like Andy Ibanez, I think he leads the league in pinch hit appearances this year, and they can just maximize their roster, and it's built with so much flexibility. There's so many players on this team that can play a multitude of positions. You know, you look at McKinstry, who Benetti so perfectly called a Zach of all trades in the broadcast the other night. I love that. But, you know, McKinstry, and you got Baez in center field, and you got Ibanez that can play anywhere in the infield, and Jahmai Jones can move around a little bit, largely in the outfield. And what a game by him today, too. But, yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening, and I think your point about the roster call-ups is a really good one. And then the Montero thing is exciting to me, and you know, we talked about it. I did not think it was a good trade deadline for them, and I'm eating crow a little bit here. But, you know, if they can get him back to being the pitcher he was before he really started to implode and walk a bunch of guys and not be able to miss bats, he's a real weapon. And AJ Hinch has familiarity with him. He was on the World Series roster with Hinch as his manager, and he was a real piece for them. I mean, he's a guy who's got nasty stuff. He just didn't always know where it was going in the last couple of years. So if they can get him right, and it's a big if, you know, in the grand scheme of things, but that could be really good. You bring in a guy like Kyle Finnegan. He's got World Series experience with the Nationals when he won it with them. Canely, who we talked about, he was in the World Series just as recently as last year with the Yankees. So there's a lot of guys that they brought in, and I felt like that was a big part of this team that was missing, was a little bit of veteran leadership, the guys that have been there before. I mean, I know Morton didn't have a good day today at all, but he has been, from what I understand, a little bit of a calming presence for this young clubhouse. And some of these guys will, you know, I think start to mature right before our very eyes, the young guys, and you blending that with some veteran talent, some veteran leadership that I think AJ can squeeze and get out of the most of. That's exciting to me. So, you know, it's a combination of a lot of good things happening all at once. And, you know, that's not to say this is a sure thing. You know, they could go into the playoffs and lose in the first round, but I certainly think their strengths are going to start showing through, and they have some strengths, like you've mentioned, you know, throughout our conversation here, the depth in particular that other teams can't boast. That's going to be a boon for them come playoff time.
I think it's a better roster than last year, in a better position at the same time of year. And so, again, depends on those ups and downs, and it depends on where they are, downswing, upswing, but they've seemed to have timed that pretty well. So it could be a pretty fun run here. We're banking on some extra weeks here for the season for coverage, because I do cover football a lot, and that's what we'll cover most of the rest of the show. But we're leaving a spot open for the Tigers until basically the World Series, until they tell me they're done, because I think there's going to be a fun run here either way. And we'll look forward to having Alex back on to talk with us through that stretch run. But
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro FM.
stay informed and stay vigilant.